It is Say It Right Sunday. It is about 3:37 on September 24th, and I am here today to speak with you all about, what is grammar? Huge, 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 huge topic. I didn't realize grammar was that big until I sat down honestly last night and just started just looking more in depth to what I already had. I didn't feel like what I had was enough for me to get on and thoroughly explain to you guys what grammar is. And so I did. I sat down and did some more research on it, and it just kind of blew up in my face in a good way. Um, because it's so much, I think we have a limited scope of what grammar is, and I don't believe I recognize that grammar has evolved since since the 50s, or since its original connotation. We have a different, if you will, we have different kinds of grammar, which I was completely unaware of. And the kinds of grammar, according to the research that I did last night, it is growing. So you just have all kinds of grammar. Comparative grammar exists. Pedagogical grammar exists. You have reference grammar, transformational grammar. You have your traditional grammar, reference grammar, theoretical grammar, and descriptive grammar, which are actually categories of grammar. You have descriptive grammar, and then you have prescriptive grammar, which is typically what is taught by or used by editors and teachers. So I'm going to come to you from the aspect of prescriptive grammar, the one that says, hey, grammar has rules how to successfully and effectively put sentences together, has rules that need to be followed, and here are those rules. So that's the angle in which I am looking at grammar right now. I believe I'm going to do some more study. As a matter of fact, I know I'm going to do some more study because I have like a larger project in my head to do with grammar, because I was looking for something specific and I could not find it. So when I can't find something, I just kind of make my own. So I know I'm going to dig more into grammar in the near future, probably tomorrow. All right, so grammar, by definition, according to Merriam-Webster.com, grammar is the study of the classes of words, their inflections, their functions, and how those things, the words in the sentences, relate to one another. And let's see, what's another way to put that for you guys? Um, let's see, inflection. So basically it's the study of classes of words, their inflections, and inflections are just their changes in form that words undergo within a sentence. And we know, if you remember anything about your English classes from way back when, because I'm not sure they actually teach grammar like this anymore in the school system. I remember them, or the last time, I'm trying to see when I taught grammar, when you get like into the ninth grade, grammar should kind of be a automatic. We go over grammar rules in the ninth grade, but we don't do an in-depth teaching. The standards aren't designed where you go that in-depth with the grammar. I think it actually focuses more on punctuation, because guys, there is a difference between grammar and punctuation. Punctuation, from the research I did last night, is going to fall under the mechanics of writing. So let me give you the definition of that. Mechanics deal with the technical stuff. So your spelling, your capitalization, your number. Do I write the number out? Do I not write the number out? Abbreviations, those things are mechanical issues. Your grammar deals with the way the words are actually put together, how we structure our sentences, how we arrange those sentences, how we get our thoughts on paper using the words that we know to use, and then those ideas or rules that are involved in getting those words on paper. So when I say arranging words, you don't want your modifier to be out of place, because then we know, you get a dangling modifier. You don't want to have a dependent clause and you don't put a period, or you don't have enough information to make a sentence and you do put a period because she went home. what else? You know, that's a dependent clause. That can't stand alone. So that's what it means by putting words together and then arranging those words, structuring those words and our thoughts and ideas on paper effectively using the rules associated with grammar. So you have grammar and I wanted to make the distinction because when students come to see us in the lab, it's like, what do you need help with? That's what we ask them. Hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? What can we help you with? Well, I'm here to get my paper checked. Great. What do you need us to do? Well, I guess I want somebody to look over my grammar. So when they tell us they want us to look over their grammar, we know they're asking for, is my punctuation? That's typically what they're asking us for. Is my punctuation right? Is my spelling right? They're asking us for a mixture of grammar and mechanics and punctuation issues, but they really should just ask for probably punctuation, because most of the time they're not really wanting us to look at the arrangement of their sentences. They really just want us to make sure they don't have any comma splices. They want us to make sure that they put all their periods in the right spot and that kind of thing. Do they have a thesis statement? They typically aren't coming into the lab and asking us to look over grammar in its definition form. So just kind of put that in your mind. Grammar is actually the way the words are put together in its simplest form, and then your mechanics is all the technical stuff. Did you capitalize the right words? Did you use the correct abbreviations? Are abbreviations important or appropriate in what you are writing? And then you have your capitalization, and those kinds of things fall under your mechanical umbrella. And the definitions I looked up or the research I did last night, people typically put punctuation under the mechanics category, but I believe it's big enough to kind of put separate. I think you could actually go through a paper and just look at the grammar, period. Look at the phrases, look at the clauses, look at the subject verb agreement, look at your modifiers and those kind of things, and then you could do another sweep of the paper to just look at the punctuation marks that are in the paper. Do they use the right punctuation marks? Did they need quotation marks and they did not put them? Do they have a comma splice? And those kinds of things. And then I do believe you could go in and do a whole nother sweep of a paper and look at just the mechanics of it. Are all the words spelled correctly? Did they use the right there, and there? Did they use capitalization where they needed to, and that kind of thing? So I believe if you wanted to do a full sweep of your paper, then you could break it down in those categories: grammar, punctuation, and then mechanics, and you'll get a much more thorough proofreading of your own personal work. If you say, hey, I'm going to look first, just do one sweep of your paper that goes through and says, are my words put together correctly? Do I have the right word choices? Are my modifiers in the right place? And those kinds of things. And then do a punctuation sweep. Check specifically for your punctuation marks. And then you can do a mechanical sweep of your paper. Is it time consuming? Most definitely. Will you have a better paper at the end of that process? Most definitely. So that's why I would suggest you do it that way. So when we say grammar, we're just actually looking at the way the words are actually combined, the way the words are put together, and the way they are structured and organized within a sentence, and then the way those words build upon the thoughts, like your original thought, which is typically your thesis statement. What are you writing this for? Why are you writing this? And then do all of the words, if you go with that. Are they gelling with that? Do they create like a complete puzzle of whatever you were trying to say to your audience by the time you get to the last word on the page? So grammar is a huge deal. I ordered a video last night. It's called Grammar Revolution. And I think it's really going to help me get a better understanding of what grammar is and why the writing now is where it is. And then remember, if the little snippet that I could get and see online, I think on YouTube, was just saying how because students aren't able to successfully understand grammar, and they don't understand grammar, they don't understand the parts of the sentence, which I'm going to get into next. Because they don't understand these things, then they aren't able to critically read like they should be able to. because you don't understand how grammar works, so you don't have a running knowledge of, you know, the noun. What is this sentence talking about? What is this story talking about? Because you're not familiar with just the basic ideals that go with your sentence structure, just your sentence structure. So let alone how all of those sentences are put together and they form a thought. The author is trying to get a point across, and knowing grammar can help us, guys, understand more our reading. And I guess I didn't realize how impactful grammar is, and so we know that there's not necessarily, at least I recognize, that the grammar lessons that I got in elementary school, that I received in elementary school, and you know, my elementary school went up to 7th grade, so that information that I got from, specifically, I remember my 7th grade teacher, you know, we had old school, old fashioned grammar books, and she taught out of them. I don't know if that's being done anymore in schools. I remember when I taught in Jones County in Georgia, you know, that was my first time teaching middle school, and that's when I had to kind of like dust off my grammar books and really do some research just to teach grammar. And it was more punctuation than grammar. It was more about commas and that kind of thing. I think I remember teaching about some phrases here and there, and possibly some dangling modifiers here and there, but I believe the bulk of it always focuses on commas, comma splices, and those kinds of things. And guys, they all do go together, because if you know anything about punctuation, then you can put your punctuation mark in the wrong spot and create some chaos in your writing. So they do all go together, but they do kind of have their own section, their own function within a written piece. And I think those various functions aren't necessarily taught like they should be now in school, at least not the grammar lessons probably a lot of us received growing up. That, hey, pull out your grammar book, which is the definition from Merriam-Webster, is actually the study of the classes of words. So that's takeaway number one, is that the grammar by definition, according to my book, and guys, I remember my book. So here's the book I've been using to research. I have no intentions of plagiarizing or stealing anybody's information. So here's the book I've been, guess it's backwards to you guys. It's called Understanding English Grammar. Martha Collin and Robert Funk are the authors. I think it's an awesome book. If you can get your hands on a copy of this, I believe it will serve you well, especially if you're an English language arts teacher. I found I think the 9th edition in a PDF file, so you can just kind of Google this, Understanding English Grammar, and I found it online, the 9th edition, because I was looking, you know, I didn't have my book at home, and I was still trying to remember some of the information as I was preparing for one of the series. So here's the book, and their grammar rule number 1 says, it's the system of rules in our heads. So the stuff we just kind of, that's innate. Remember on series 4, part 1, I talked about how language competence is innate. We know, we kind of come here knowing that she is a girl is the order in which we should structure our sentences. No one sits us down at 2 and says, no, you can't say me baby. You have to say I am a baby. No one sits us down and tells us that, because we are constantly, the adults in our lives were constantly putting words in the right place, using correct grammar, using correct punctuation. They were speaking to us in what I call the standard English format. Then we, along the way, specifically this particular book tells us, by the time we went to kindergarten, our language competence was in place, or our ability to, I want to quote that right because I thought it was awesome. If I can find it, of course, I'll be looking for it and can't find it. And I didn't print out my other notes. Shame on me. It just talks about, by the time we go to kindergarten, you guys, we are pretty much good to go when it comes to putting our words together. And I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it. But by the time we get to kindergarten, guys, we are good. Now, do you know this information consciously? And that's the answer. That's why we have to be taught what grammar is because we don't consciously know the rules. We are using grammar in its subconscious state. Most of us, we've heard it, we pause. So what do? We put up, I think that the thing is, if you pause, you need a comma right there. So then you get into comma splices and you get into comma errors behind that ideology because no one has specifically taught you, here it is, no one has taught you that that's not necessarily true. Is your language competence on the inside of you tells you that's okay, and that's not necessarily true. So, but for the most part, it says your grammar system was in place by your first day of kindergarten. So the actual formation of words and how to structure words and put those words in order, that information was in us. Most of us, I believe, probably all of us, if we are native speakers of the English language, by the first day of kindergarten. So that's a big deal. So why are we still struggling with grammar? Why are these rules in our heads, as this particular book defines grammar? The system of rules in our head is how they define, one of the definitions they use to define grammar. How come we don't successfully, or I say adequately, use the grammar rules? One, because we have not been taught the grammar rules. This information is innate, and yes, we know how to form a sentence, but we don't necessarily know the rules that help us to form sentences correctly. We are using grammar in its subconscious state, and that's why learning grammar is so important. It brings to us a consciousness of the stuff that's already inside of us. So that's grammar rule number one. Grammar, by definition, according to Understanding English Grammar, this textbook, is the system of rules in our heads. Point blank, period. We know there are certain things we can and cannot do within a sentence at a basic level, and that's part of grammar. All right, so these, again, are the subconscious system rules or our language competence. So that's why these things vary when you meet somebody like the kid I keep telling you guys about. And I can see this kid, I believe I could call his name, but I won't, of course, I won't do that online. That came to me and said, "Miss Harris, it's supposed to be you ain't." And I'm like, no, it's supposed to be you are not. But that was his language competence. That's what he had heard all of his life. You ain't supposed to do this, and you ain't supposed to do that. And so he walked away from his household with the language competence of ain't is an appropriate word to use when you're supposed to be speaking, speaking correctly, if you will, because then you do get into, like we talked about last week, regionalism. So what is correct? According to this textbook, there's no proper standard English language because of the different dialects that do exist. And we know different dialects exist because we can go to various parts of the world who speak English, whose native tongue is English. Like up north, they say different words than what they do down south, but that we understand what they're saying if we're familiar with pop being a terminology or a term that they use up north, and then you come down south and it's a soda. We know what you're talking about. Something carbonated with some sizzle, with some bubbles in it. We know what people are talking about when they say that. I think the teaching of grammar is important in this day and age simply because I believe now writing is a weapon. People aren't doing it correctly often. So when businesses find someone who is able to correctly formulate sentences and put words in their proper order and use punctuation marks correctly, you are a gold mine. You are a gem, because people still value the written language, whether we use it on a daily basis or not, and which we do. We use writing, we use the English language all of the time, guys. When you're texting, you're still writing. When you send an email, it's still a form of writing. It's communication, but it's still in the written format. And I know we can get a little bit more lax with our text messaging because it's almost like me saying you ain't, and my homies, or me code switching. I can talk one way with my friends, but I don't necessarily need to get on here and just chop up the English language if I'm trying to present something to you guys in a formal standard and formal format. So that's what text messages is to me. It's like having a conversation with my best friend, and we're shooting the breeze, and I can slip into my homegirl dialect with her. But when I go talk to my boss, if I give a presentation at work, that dialect may not be appropriate. So text messaging is like that. I don't even send the same kinds of text to everybody. And depending on what I'm trying to say, then that does dictate what kind of message I send. So writing is the same way. We can't just send any and everything out to different people in the same way we would send it out maybe to our friend or maybe to our sisters or our brother, because it's not appropriate. And that's why one of the reasons we learn grammar is so that you can send out the appropriate message, so that your words can be arranged in the appropriate format. One, so people can know what you're talking about. Anybody ever received a paper or a text message and you like, what? Autocorrect kicked in and they just put a, or you were typing too fast and you didn't proofread the text message and you sent it out anyway, and then you really go back and read it like, dog, what was I talking about? Well, I see a lot of writing now in papers like that. It's like, what are you trying to say? And you have to ask the person, hey, what are you trying to say here? And then help them rearrange their words, possibly rearrange their modifiers, their phrases, their clauses. And yes, most people don't know these specific terms, because that's one of the things about inflection from the Merriam-Webster definition, the study of the classes of words and their inflections. So inflections include case, if you guys remember that from your grammar school days, gender. So is it a masculine word, a feminine word, or a common neuter word? Like the table is a neuter. Table is neuter. It's neutral. Chair is neutral. It's neither male or female. It's just a chair. It's it. You have what you call number. So is it a singular word or a plural word? You have what they call tense, which is it past tense or present tense? You have person, we know that, first, second, and third. We know the mood is the attitude of the author who is writing the particular piece. And then we have voice, and we know that has two forms, active and passive voice. So within one sentence, these things can change to fit the overall flow and meaning of what you are trying to convey to your audience. And the problem with grammar that I am seeing now, people don't know these basic rules. So you're trying to write a memoir and you may be using the third person. Well, if it's your memoir, then you're telling the story. So of course we know first person is more appropriate. Subject, verb, agreement, issues in your case, issues in your number, issue in sometimes in your gender when you are going from your proper nouns to pronouns. Those kinds of things can really confuse somebody, especially if they don't have an understanding of what is a subject and a verb. And guys, I've seen it. Like, not just on this job I'm on, I have seen it over the years in writing where you say, hey, identify the subject, and people cannot do it. And that's a huge problem, because if somebody tells you, all right, well, great, this paper looks good, but you need to go in and fix your tense, which most of the time has to do with your verbs. What are your verbs looking like? Then they're not going to be able to do that because they are not conscious of what tense involves, and they don't know which words are verbs versus subject. So huge deal. Writing is a huge big deal, guys, and I just don't know if we've recognized that I know we've read some powerful pieces. We are probably readers. We read books, we read newspaper articles and that kind of thing. But to actually be able to do it ourselves and write ourselves is just as powerful as us being able to pick up someone else's work and read what they have written. Why? Because then we can write our own piece and get our voices out there, get our voices heard, if you will. So our takeaway number 2 is grammar defined, and it is defined as the formal description of the rules. So us being able to say, this is how you correct a dangling modifier, or this is how you correct a run-on sentence, or hey, use this rule to correct your fragments. That's another definition of grammar. So you have the actual study of the classes of the words. It's one definition. Grammar can also be described or defined as how words are actually put together and how you structure and arrange those words within your paper or whatever you're writing to get your thoughts across. That's another basic definition. You have the other basic definition of grammar being the rules in your head. Not that they're necessarily right or wrong, but they are what you consider correct. So that's a third different definition. And then the fourth definition is the actual formal description of those rules. So you being able to identify, if this is an objective form of the word or do you need the subjective form of the word. And then you get into what they call in English syntax, the syntax of a sentence. So these are the definitions that apply when you say, hey, I'm actually studying grammar. You are doing like is it called exegesis? I've heard that word before. You're doing an in-depth study of a particular sentence and almost probably diagramming sentences when you do this. I don't know if you guys have ever had to do it. I don't remember us having to actually diagram sentences. Like, draw the little charts and put the lines down, trying to get to the basic meat of the sentence. Because y'all know sentences really have a lot going on. She is walking home. I think we had a student come in the lab and she's like, that sentence is too long. Well, sentences can be however long you need them to be to get your point across if you punctuate them correctly, if you use the correct grammar rules, if you use the correct mechanical rules that are associated with the English language and writing in particular. I've read, my goodness, anybody ever read the Bible? Some of those sentences are extra long because they have commas, they have colons, they have semicolons. And if you read certain passages in the Bible, it'll start off in verse 1 and the period won't be until like verse 8. So if you want to see some long sentences that are right, go read that. I've read some sentences in books that are super, super long compared to maybe some of the sentences I would write, or of course some of the sentences I have seen. And it's like, oh, wow. And that amazes me. That absolutely amazes me to see a sentence that has just these series of punctuation marks and they're in the right spot. And you're like, wow, what is this sentence saying? And that's when those critical thinking skills can come in, because if you're not at the period, then you're not done. The sentence isn't done. So then you can break that sentence down according to the punctuation marks that are within the sentence, and you can get an understanding piece by piece and put those pieces together and then get a whole thought for what the author is trying to explain to you. You can get the mood and the attitude of the speaker based off what punctuation marks they use. I think that's one reason students struggle so much with punctuation, because depending on how they punctuate, is how they actually want you to read their work. And so that's the same for us. Depending on how we punctuate a sentence, we are telling our readers how we want to interpret, or how we want them to interpret what we're saying. So grammar is huge. Punctuation marks are huge. Mechanics, guys, this stuff is huge. So when you start talking about the formal description of the rules, that's when you get into your two separate categories. So you have what they call descriptive grammar, which is the rules or patterns that underline our use of words and phrases and clauses in the sentence. And then you have what most of us are familiar with which is prescriptive grammar. So this is what editors use. When you get your paper back from a professor, or you've gotten a paper back from a teacher and it had all these red marks on it and all these scribbles and underline, and y'all know some of the symbols, your double line with the P looks like a P, telling you needed a paragraph right here and all this kind of stuff. These are the rules that are enforced in what is believed to be the correct uses of language. So these are the rules. I don't know who made them up, and they said, hey, this is how you correctly punctuate something. This is how you correctly use this. That's what you call prescriptive, like a prescription. Hey, these are your symptoms, and then here is the medicine that goes and matches with those symptoms that you are displaying. They give us medicine based off of the symptoms that we have. They prescribe of something based off of their standard. So the same thing with grammar. We have a set of rules, and based off of those rules, that's what's enforced, and that's what's typically taught in schools when it is taught. that prescriptive grammar. Hey, somebody somewhere said the comma needs to do this and the period needs to do that, and that's what's typically taught. So that is kind of the big idea I have in my head to really, I don't even know how big this project is, but I really want to see a timeline of grammar. How did it get to be what it is now? Because I can tell you it has changed. You have what they call at one point your traditional method of grammar, but it has changed because of modern linguists and transformed into what they actually call transformational grammar. And then you get into these other grammars I was telling you about, mental grammar and comparative grammar. Like, I didn't even know all that stuff existed. I'm like, grammar is grammar. And that's not necessarily true. You start getting into linguistics, and then, guys, you open up a whole nother can of worms when you start attaching language to linguistics. And I'm not going to even get into that because, one, I don't fully understand it. I did take a course on linguistics and I was actually enjoying it. I've got to go back. It's a course online, so I get a chance to go back and finish it. And I'm looking more into it because I can see how we can help us think critically if we understand. Like, to me, from what I can understand so far, linguistics helps you understand the intended purpose of the speaker, which I think is powerful. It takes your interpretation out of the mix. All right, so our last takeaway is the fact that grammar, another definition for grammar, so I think we're on like definition number 4 or 5, the social implications of usage, and this is called our linguistic etiquette. So another definition is how we actually use the word socially, and these are the do's and don'ts of usage. So that's when you get into, oh, you have good grammar skills versus somebody who has poor grammar skills. And of course, this is all based off of the standard of the English language and not necessarily regionalism, which we talked about last week. Some words and some phrases being appropriate in certain regions and not necessarily appropriate in other places. So these are your manners, if you will. So you got good manners when it comes to grammar. So we know saying you are not is more appropriate than going to your boss and saying, hey, you ain't supposed to. We know that's not typically deemed as appropriate, and we know that that would be considered in most cases bad grammar. Like, I can't teach my kids, even though is it in the dictionary, guys? I don't remember. I think I looked it up just to see if it was in there. And so they're adding a lot of slang and words like growing up would have never appeared in like a standard dictionary. But I don't know if they've put it in there because sometimes, you know, words get used so much and they slip them in. But I know if it's in there next to it does say slang. Like, it has that noted that, hey, this is a word that the system, if you will, considers a word that is not necessarily standard. It's a slang word, whatever that means. I know what it means. It's like, what is slang mean? I ain't got to do a whole nother study on what slang is. All right, so because English has evolved so much, and I believe that's going to be one thing, because words are constantly changing. For me to have my English degree, we had to learn the history of the English language. And guys, I'm talking about how the tongue works in this thing, how sounds evolve, phoneme. I mean, we got into, let me say this. I didn't get into, I just had that was like probably one of the hardest classes I took in college, learning the history of the English language, because I just couldn't follow the professor. I probably need to go to YouTube University now and just get some more understanding of it. And I think over time, like in the last couple of months, I have been getting a much more in-depth understanding of, you know, the tongue. Because, I mean, in the book, it shows you pictures of the tongue and how this sound does this and TH does that. But it was from a historical point of view. And, you know, at the time, history and I didn't like that stuff. But now I think I'm in a different place where I like to research. I like to have an understanding of how things got here. And so I probably go pull out my book. I know I kept my books. It may be at home, like at my mom's house, my parents' house. To go back, and I believe I could probably sit down now and get it, and actually get it. Because one thing about things like that, it helps me as a teacher, especially if I'm going to be a writer, because I am a writing specialist, because I teach, I have a desire to teach reading, to people who can't read. Illiteracy is a thing I'm supposed to be doing eventually at some point. And guys, I'm like, I don't know how to teach anybody. I mean, I was a reading teacher for 3 years, and I caught on how to teach reading after I left. Like, it's hard if you haven't been trained on how to teach reading, because even the reading class that I took my certification for, it didn't help me teach Johnny, who 12, what to do to help him get an understanding of how to read. But I know I could do it now. I know I could do it now. I've been taught how to read, supernaturally. I've been taught how to teach somebody else to read. And so I do believe I probably need to go back and get an understanding of the history of the English language a little bit more in depth, because you get into sounds like that. You get into how sounds have changed and morphed over time, which helps you understand phonology. It helps you understand which are the actual sounds in our system. So A equals A, that kind of thing. And it helps you understand what they call the morphology, which are the actual units, and the words, and which leads you to syntax, which are the sentence patterns. So you need to know all of that if you're going to help somebody learn how to read. And it's not just, all right, come here, sit down. It's a mental thing. But the good thing about all of that is we do come here with a language competence. So that one thing if I don't take away anything from this series, that's the one thing I believe I'm going to take away. And I do believe that's the one thing I want you guys to take away from this whole entire series called Understanding English Grammar, is that grammar, our language competence, that information is in us. It is innate in us. And you just have to have that information triggered. So it gives me a newfound confidence that no matter who I sit down with, they can learn this stuff. This, and I'm calling it stuff, and not out of disrespect, but they can learn grammar, they can learn sentence structure, they can get an understanding specifically of plural words and what it means to have a singular word and tense. We can get them to a place. It may take a while, but it can be done. And that's exciting for me, to know that it truly can be done. And it may take a little time, and but you just have to kind of work with that person and give them patience and give them time. Because typically when you're talking about illiteracy, by the time that shows up, because you have a range, and I'll share this and probably get off. Literacy has a range. So you have what you call your illiteracy. It's a range. So you have illiteracy on this end. And then you have what I found out in research to be advanced literacy. And I think it's one more step beyond advanced literacy, according to my research. And in between, you have one kind of literacy I'm sure you guys are familiar with, is functional literacy, illiteracy. So you have what people who are able to function in the day-to-day world, but they're not necessarily literate by the standard definition, which is being able to read and write. So literacy, I think a lot of times when people hear that word, it's just your ability to read, but you've got to be able to read and write to be able to be considered literate. And so then you get into ranges of literacy based off your competence in both of those areas. So when you're talking about somebody who's a functional illiterate, that means they can hold down a job with the basic skills in reading and writing that they have, but they may not can be the CEO of a company, maybe a Fortune 500 company, because they don't have those skills to do those kinds of things. Or they can, or they're just going to be kind of dependent on people to help interpret and help read and that kind of thing. So you do have a range of illiteracy and literacy. So it goes from illiteracy all the way up into your advanced literacy. And when you get into advanced literacy, that's when you start specifically taking courses in like one thing, becoming literate and being able to read and write in a specific area. So I could say I may be advanced in grammar literacy, because I could after I finish this series and after I do some more research, I'm not ready yet, I could, really teach and demonstrate a more thorough understanding than most concerning grammar. So, we've heard terms like digital literacy. That's a thing. You have, I can't even think of all this stuff. Guys, and I did this research, I started this research back in like last October, so we're going on a year. But I believe it's about time to pick it back up. Because I'm working on this whole thing and I see it's working in pieces. So when you get into grammar, I don't know if I can do the research here and then not see the connection between, why people aren't able to read, one, and then why people aren't able to critically think about what they're reading and get to the end and you read this whole, I see it. Students read these whole passages of things, whatever the passage is, you're like, okay, so what does that mean? And it's like, Susie went to the store, and you're like, okay, great, why? Her mama told her to, but why did her mama, you get these basic answers, and there's a more in-depth reason as to why certain things are moving and shaking in a particular story. So I know understanding grammar helps people with that, because now you have a conscious understanding as to why sentences are constructed and put together in the manner in which they are put together, and that helps give you an understanding. So I'm getting more and more understanding as to how to teach people to read on various levels, and I'm excited about that. And of course, as these series are rolling out, I'm sure I'll be able to share some things with you guys in the near future. So just to do a recap again, grammar has many different definitions, which is the whole point of this particular series for this week. What is grammar? Grammar is the actual study of the classes of words and their inflections. And we talked about inflections being how words change in form over the course of a text. And they may not change over the course of a text, because if you're writing something in first person, then it needs to stay first person throughout your text. You don't want to be, mixing and matching. But the fact that you have case and gender and number and tense and that kind of thing, and you do want that information to be consistent throughout what you are working on. So, but it's just the study of classes of words. And then you get into your classes of words, which are your parts of speech. Your nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions, your determiners, words like it, there, this, that, and then your interjections. Those are your classes of words. So then you take these classes of words and you attach to them their inflections, which are your case, gender, number, tense, person, mood, and voice. And then those functions, how they function in a sentence. And then all of that put together and how they relate into one sentence. Yes, that is a lot, I know, and yes, I am excited. So that's one definition, just the actual study of the classes of words. A more generic definition is how words are put together, how they are structured and organized within a sentence, and all of that goes into it. But if you want to explain to somebody what grammar is, it's the actual putting of words together and then how those words are organized within a sentence. Another definition number 3, which was our first takeaway, is grammar is actually the system of rules we have in our heads. Not necessarily that those rules are right, but they are what we are aware of as to how come we can put certain words here and not necessarily over there. We bring to the table a lifetime of understanding this. Most of us are aware that she is a girl is the correct order of a sentence. If we hear somebody say, girl, she it, it's like, what? What are you trying to say? So we have built in us an innate ability to understand language in its structural state, if you will, and how those words are supposed to be put together in a specific order. So that's grammar rule number 3. And then another grammar rule or another definition of grammar. It's the actual formal description of these rules. And then in that, you get into your prescriptive and descriptive categories of grammar, and being able to say descriptive, remember the rules or patterns that underline our use of the word. So why are we using the words and sentences and clauses the way that we are? And then what most of us are most familiar with is the prescriptive grammar, which is the enforcement of what is believed to be the correct use of language. All right, so that's grammar 2. And then grammar 3 are your social implications of usage, whether or not somebody is using grammar correctly or incorrectly. And the best example I have of that is that word ain't. Is ain't good grammar, or is ain't bad grammar. And most of us, based off of the written standard, would say to use ain't in a formal paper where it's not about dialogue and that kind of thing, is bad grammar. And guys, I've seen because of these buddies here, technology, grammar is getting worse. Punctuation's getting a little bit worse. Mechanics is getting worse, because now what students are doing, if you're a part of the older generations, and I put myself in the older generations on this one, what's happening, the kids don't know how to code switch. So they absolutely don't know how to talk to their friends, in one language, because I believe that's a text message has its own language. They don't understand how to talk in that language to their friends, and then talk to their professor in another language that's considered academic. You have an academic language, if you will. And so it's a huge issue, and so they just, it's a very, very big issue especially when it comes down to that writing, because some stuff just does not fly. Some stuff is just not okay if you are turning in a critical analysis of Beowulf or a critical analysis of Romeo and Juliet. It's just certain things that aren't considered appropriate in that kind of writing. And just the letter U from your text message language, not appropriate. Not having your periods and that kind of thing in the right space, those things are not appropriate. And we just have a generation of people, and I won't even say kids. You just have a generation of people who are just becoming more and more lax with their ability to use correct grammar, mechanics, and punctuation. Because remember, I did say grammar and mechanics are two different things. When you're asking somebody to look over your grammar, all you're really asking them to do by definition is going over, are your words structured in the sentence correctly? Do you have independent clauses, or do you have a whole bunch of dependent clauses? Do you have dangling modifiers? Are your phrases in the right spot? That's what you're asking. Do you use the right word choices? That's what you're asking people to look at when you ask for grammar assistance. When you want help with your punctuation and spelling and that kind of thing, you've got to say that. You're more so in the lane of mechanics. Capitalization is a mechanical issue. I personally believe punctuation should just be a category all by itself. But in my research, I did see where people would put punctuation under mechanics. Mechanics talks about spelling, abbreviation, and that kind of thing. So just so you know, if you ever need help with something, if you're struggling with punctuation, say, hey, I want somebody to look over my punctuation. Did I punctuate these sentences correctly? If you're looking to see if your structure within those sentences is correct, that's when you start asking for grammar. And if you're looking for something like, hey, I just want, my capitalization, my abbreviations, can I use this? That's mechanics. So it's a 3-part process when you're proofreading. And probably can get more into that, because then you get into structure. Is this the right organizational structure for what you've written? Is it a cause and effect paper? So do you have a structure for that? And you get into this whole other, writing is huge. It is so big. It is so huge. And, I'm super excited about that, because it's going to always give me something to do. So I hope you guys enjoyed this series. Grammar is big, so if it sounds like I'm rambling, I am so sorry, but grammar is just much bigger than I thought it was. I just didn't, I was not conscious of the fact that grammar has so many levels and so many layers until last night. It's not just, what I thought it was being taught the way I was in school. It's just not that at all. It's so much larger, it's much bigger than probably what most of us perceive and conceive grammar to be. So, thank you so much for writing. Again, grammar has what five basic definitions, and of course I will do a takeaway or a quick wrap up of this particular series on, I think I said Wednesday. I think the advertisement is going to hit your timeline and say Wednesday. And guys, I'm not putting times on this because that gives me a little bit more flexibility just to get on when I can, versus trying to say, hey, I'm going to get on at 5 and then just not being able to do it. Or honestly, some days just not feeling like doing it at 5, but I get a fresh wind at 7, that kind of thing. So that's why you don't see a time on the advertisements, because that's just giving me a little bit more flexibility to get on. When I feel, honestly feel like getting on, versus these set times, which were kind of binding me, and just kind of restricting me to a degree. Not anything major, but I think I shared with you guys, when I say, hey, I'm going to get on at 6:45 on a Sunday, then I'm literally like sitting waiting on 6:45 to hit. So, I got on at about 3:30, so it's been about an hour. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video. Please share the video. And I will see you guys later on this week, hopefully. I will see you guys later on this week to give you a recap of this information and just take out, the recaps are just designed to be 15 minutes. I come on, give you guys a takeaway, give you guys a definition of grammar. Bam, boom, I'm out. On Sunday, I do, I just talk. And I'm not like randomly talking. I really am talking about something. I believe this series made sense. So please like, please share. Please let me know what you think. Of course, I like the feedback. I like the comments because it helps me fine tune what I am doing. So have a great week. It is Sunday, so you guys can have a great week. I hope you have a great week. And please join us again on Wednesday as we recap what is grammar. And I hope this is giving you some insight and some understanding that will help you in your day-to-day lives as it relates to writing. I will see you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye.